cat. Happy quarantine, everyone. My thoughts and prayers really do go out to anyone who's been affected by this whole coronavirus pandemic. It's a crazy situation, but there's no one else here, so I don't really have to wear the mask, thank God. Today we are in the garage again, working on things for the Nova, especially, of course, our old friend now that it's been here for a few months, the 1JZ. So we're just gonna jump straight to it. This is what's actually going to allow me to fit this particular configuration, the 1JZ VVTi with the ETCSI drive-by-wire sort of type throttle setup. This is a later engine. I think I've said before, it was used up to, I think, 2007 in this kind of configuration. But major issue is, so you can see the oil pan has the sump in the front half. The JZs came with technically 3 oil pan setups: front, rear, and sort of a mid, which was still kind of closer to the front, but you know, it's only used in a few models. Most people don't really care about those. The Nova has the cross member in the forward sort of section of the engine bay. You can see that. So really, I can't have the sump right in the middle of everything here. I have to have a rear sump. And the 1JZ only came with a rear sump in like one model, which I believe was only the Soarer, the 1JZ VVTi, only came in the later Soarers and only, you know, certain versions of that for this version of the engine. So it's very difficult to find that. I was hoping maybe I would be able to find one, but unfortunately I wasn't able to. But I did get this front sump engine set up from JDM Westside. Shout out to Joseph again for the awesome deal. And I had to make other arrangements for the oil pan because the oil pans swap between all the JZ models, more or less. Some might need a little bit of modification, but they're basically a bolt-in affair. So this is, as I'm told, the rear sump oil pan setup from a naturally aspirated Toyota Soarer or SC300. The information was a little bit conflicting, but it's JZ oil pan, it's rear sump, and that's what counts. This is the actual pickup, which we'll address later. But basically the JZ oil pans came in 2 main halves. We have the main body of the oil pan, or the upper section, and then this bottom section. And then we have the pickup, like I mentioned, and then there's actually a baffle section as well that kind of goes between the 2 halves. But today we're only going to be dealing with the bottom section and the upper section because we're not installing this for real today. I'm actually just going to unbolt the front sump and test fit the rear sump just to make sure that everything is going to be kosher. I know that I'm going to have to change some things with the oil drain from the turbo. As you can see, it being a front sump, most of the oil pan is over here, so the drain goes over here. But with this pan, there's nothing there. So there's nowhere for the drain really to go. It's going to have to go here. And I believe I will have to move this back a little bit. I still need to take some measurements. It might not be as far as I thought. It might be basically the same spot. I haven't really been able to research a whole lot, but that is the section that I'm going to have to modify. But Toyota has quite a bit of wisdom because they were smart and used the same casting for their parts for a multitude of models. So even though this came in a non-turbo model, it still has the same casting, so they can either leave it undrilled, untapped for the non-turbo models, or go ahead and pop that out, you know, throw some threads in there, and then they have an oil drain. But first things first, we're gonna kind of clear some space, get the proper tools out. I wanna go ahead and take the harness off for the second time in the life of this engine because plans change, as we all know. You know, initially I wanted to jump in and just get the gaskets changed out right away. I've got my gasket set sitting right back over there, all the way from Japan via the United Arab Emirates. That gasket set has been around the globe. It's rather amazing, literally, because it came from Japan, and based off the tracking information when I ordered it, it actually journeyed west, all the way through Western Europe, across the Atlantic, across the entire United States, here to Southern California, and now it's sitting on top of the hood for my 1971 Nova in my garage, untouched, for now. But I'm gonna get to that next. The first step is basically just, like I said, slap on the oil pan, make sure everything is good to go. I'm gonna get the harness out of the way for now. And just so I can measure things, I'm gonna pop the core support back on, make sure that I have clearance for things like the radiator and such, because I really want to be able to use the same radiator. I'm hoping not to add that cost on top of everything else, because of course this kind of thing does take money. Measure things in the tunnel for transmission and transmission options. We're gonna get with the old GoPro, get a nice little time-lapse going, and pop this harness off. Alright, just like that, we have the harness out. Honestly, this isn't in bad shape compared to some other, like, 15-plus-year-old cars that I've seen. I did take the plastic kind of like, I call it like a caddy thing that sits inside the runners of the intake manifold, and that made it possible to actually get this off without taking the intake manifold off, which is what I had to do initially. But this way I was able to just kind of slide everything out, as you saw. So that's really nice, because I want to be able to keep this in the car or on the engine, so that when it's in the car I can see how everything fits, because I really need to make sure that I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to get rid of the brake booster anyway, and I'm planning on doing it kind of regardless, but it would be nice to know if it even would fit. Again, I don't think it would, but you never know. It's not a very intrusive plenum here. The biggest concerns are going to be kind of where the sump's going to end up near the steering gear and all that, and especially what my options are going to be for engine mounts. I'm planning on using the upper half of the stock mounts, kind of the pedestal parts, if you will. This rubber isolator lower part, I'm not. Funny enough, the other side actually was basically falling off when I got the engine, and I think I barely grabbed it and it ripped right off. Maybe I'll be able to rip the other side off just for fitment purposes, because it's very, very tight in here. I'm going to be doing a different filter setup. I'm going to be getting rid of the AC compressor, and I'm going to be doing a different oil cooler, because the stock one has this big old cast thing. It puts it right over the engine mount. Just not very good. I'm looking into maybe a filter relocation to go along with that. But without having shock towers, there's not a whole lot of options for putting stuff in here. Maybe I could put it on the frame rail or something, but we'll kind of see when we get to that point. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and tackle the oil pan, swap that out, and give us an idea of what the next step will be. Well, a few splashes of coolant notwithstanding, that wasn't too bad. I wasn't sure how much coolant was left in the block, and I guess now I know, seeing as it's basically all out now. That's fine, it's whatever. Looking underneath, getting an even better view of the pan. Overall, this engine seemed like it was fairly clean. Little things like, do have the inspection port plug here. Oh, come on, for the clutch slash torque converter, flex plate, all that. I do want to keep that, so I do have to remember to hold on to that with the new pan, because it does not have one. That goes there. And now we're just gonna take a bunch of bolts off, basically. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy.
Come on.
We're just about halfway there. Everything looks excellent in here. Not a whole lot of varnish, which is what you get when people don't maintain their cars very well, don't do oil changes very often, but this actually just wipes right off, so that's actually a really good sign. Whereas it might have sat for a little bit before I acquired it, it looks like it was at least maybe decently maintained, at least, hopefully, in its life. Everything over here looks good. Not really any varnish buildup on the baffle. Pickup looks good. There's no chunks or any surprises in the sump pan here. And I didn't see anything in the pickup screen either. Just oil, little bits of like dirt kind of, but no metal debris or anything like that. So it looks like we are in good shape, and just gonna take the rest of the pan off. oil pan is off. Taking another peek under here. Everything, like I said, looks really, really good. One thing I'm especially happy with is if you look at the underside of the pistons, they look great. You can see a little bit of the skirts and some of the ones that are at bottom center there. They look very clean as well, which is good. These engines are generally supposed to be fairly low mileage, anywhere from 50 to 60,000 miles usually, because that's all they're allowed to be run in Japan. Then they got to be swapped out. Everything is ringing true to that. Everything looks awesome in here, and it doesn't look like this pan's ever been off before either. That's also another good sign. It does look like this is all original. There's no signs of any scraping along the sealing surface here. Going to basically it'll be time to grab the other pan. I'm just gonna give it kind of like a quick wipe down, make sure there's no like obvious debris inside of it. I think there was a little bit of like dust in here that I just gotta kind of brush out. I'm gonna do that real quick and then we'll slap it on there. And that's pretty much where I wanted to get to. I only put, I think, 4 bolts per section here. Just kind of cover the 4 corners of each part of the pan. Like I said, I did not put the baffle and the pickup in because there's just really no need to do that right now. This is just for mock-up purposes. But nice to know that everything seems to fit. Nothing is warped weird or anything. There's no, like cracks or anything that I can see. Sometimes what can happen in some weird cases, there might be a crack in the pan, but you don't see it until it's like tightened down and it spreads or something. Just little things like that you never want to sneak up on you. No weird interference issues or anything like that. So today, just because I'm running out of daylight here, I'm going to continue this another time. And then once we come back, we'll be ready to test fit in the engine bay. All right, so welcome to day 2 of, well, you might have missed a couple things, but this is day 2 of test fitting the 1JZ in the Nova here. So obviously in that first part, I swapped out the oil pan for the rear sump pan. You got the old one still draining away over here. And it's kind of boring just throwing an engine on a lift, so I just cut that out real quick. What I have here right now is engine's actually under its own weight currently, and we are sitting basically on the factory Chevy frame side engine mounts. So I've basically got the engine lined up on, there's a kind of a steel part underneath. You can kind of see this a little bit right here. That's kind of preventing it from sitting directly on the mount, but that's fine because height-wise I kind of like where it's sitting. It's a little bit high. It's kind of weird to see that, but it's not that high, and it will drop down in the front eventually. But I'm basically doing this as a proof of concept, make sure things like the alternator, the turbo clears. The radiator looks like it definitely should clear. I'm very, very excited for that. And clearance on the firewall is excellent. Basically, this is kind of what you want. You don't want it so far back that you have to cut the firewall apart, stuff like that. We're in a good spot here. I'm actually really excited. It's close, but not concerning where the turbo ends up. And the alternator has plenty of clearance, all that. I'm really happy with this. And this is giving me so much excitement for actual final fitment. So I've been kind of thinking about issues I may run into. This was one of them, kind of like, will my control arms fit? Because the car that this engine would have come out of would not have had control arm mounts like this. It would have had shock towers up here that would have been like a flat surface. So, not much concern there. Generally, this is really cool. The engines are meant to sit at a slightly backward angle, rear kind of tilted angle. And we kind of have that going on here. It might be a little bit steep, but I'm fine with kind of making it a little bit more dramatic. I've got the jack stand, or the floor jack, holding up the back of the block here. You can't really see, but basically where the bell housing bolts up, the very bottom back part of the engine down there. Now, one of the major things I also wanted to check, like I mentioned, the radiator. I'm actually going to take the course report now and kind of mock it up. fenders don't really care. Brake booster, even though I don't care about it, it actually does clear, which is cool. But I also want to see what kind of like routing and such I'm gonna need to use for intercooler piping, as well as oil cooler lines as well. That's not as big of a concern because you only need a couple inches of firewall space kind of for those. But the intercooler piping, obviously we need a couple like 3-inch pipes to be able to route around things, get around coolant lines and all that jazz. So let's see. Yep, looks like we're gonna time lapse that up too. And boom, there it is. The radiator and fan and shroud setup are installed. Now this might be a little deceiving how close things seem here. It's a little bit dark, so it's kind of hard to tell. But I can get my hand in between the radiator and the crank pulley. And also, both of these things are not going to be here. So you can ignore this pulley. And also, I'm sure people might have some concerns about airflow not having, God, this is like probably a foot tall and a half a foot across, like half a cubic foot of space in here that's going to be open, and more airflow will be able to flow along the side of the block there. More air will be able to escape from behind the radiator for sure. Not to mention, remember, I do have my hood vents that should still be functional. I don't know about clearance though, of course. We'll have to kind of see and compare. And looking at this, I'm fairly sure I have plenty of room to lower the block on this side for sure. But the concern, obviously, on this side is that the turbo is already about as close to the upper control arm as I would ever want. So that is the kind of concern here. I will have to compare, maybe I can see if I can measure height difference from the ground on the passenger side versus driver side of the engine. But they're not far off. I don't think it's really far enough to make a difference. The engine itself, if you kind of look in line with everything, it looks fairly level here. If you just kind of compare it, it's not very far off. So we'll have to see. One other major concern I do have here is, if you notice, the coolant neck is a little bit higher than the radiator cap. So concern there, but I'm pretty sure that I can just get a bleeder into this hose here. There's a little bit of space conveniently right in front of the timing cover, so should have room to be able to find a hose that'll kind of go across, pop down. Like I said, this pulley won't be here, so I do have kind of all that room, and should not be a big issue. One other concern that I do have, and again, this is mitigated because this power steering pump will not be right here, is intercooler piping. I do basically have to span this, or if I want to drop it kind of straight down and kind of come out here, we'll kind of see. I'm kind of restricted to, I think I've talked about this in other videos, this little circle here is pretty much right where I want to put the driver's side inlet, cold side pipe basically. And so I don't think that'll be difficult. Basically come off here, maybe a 90, 90, or a couple 45 things in there. But I will have a little bit of interference here. Now I can bring the engine back some. I don't have a problem beating the crap out of my firewall. I probably will just do that just for kind of peace of mind, but honestly, nothing is interfering right now, like at all. I have room to get wiring and such, fuel lines, you name it back there, although I'm pretty sure I'm going to be riding the fuel lines on the driver's side frame rail. These brake lines won't be here, the brake booster will not be here, but I will have something else mounted here most likely, and that's also one of my concerns here, was whether or not I would need to mount it closer forward, or if I would have room here. I think I'll have room here. But I'll talk about that in a future video. I'm still gathering info on that. Let's just say that I won't be without power steering, but it will not be driven by a pulley. But we'll talk about that more later. So overall, I am very excited for this. I am very pleased with the results of the test fit here. There's still going to be plenty of concern, of course, about things like transmission clearance. It's fairly difficult to see. I'll squeeze you in here, but this transmission tunnel is not meant for big transmissions. So we'll kind of see. I do have more information as well for the transmission. I actually have some parts that are on their way, be here in about a week, and I will kind of film some other parts that I have chilling over here as well. Anybody who's good at part numbers, maybe they can do some fancy Googling with that. That's all I got for you today. Again, everybody stay safe with everything going on in the world, in the U.S. You know, thoughts and prayers again are out there for everybody. Stay positive, and I'll see you in the next one.
That